Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. So much is happening in the Kohberger case, and by what I mean happening is on the 23rd, Bryan Kohberger is going to get sentenced. And on the 18th, which is just this Thursday, they are trying to, especially the media, is trying to get the whatchamacallit, the where they can't talk, where they are not allowed to report. They're trying to get that removed, and we'll see what happens. There's no reason why they should have that order anymore. They should be able to talk. They should be able to talk all about the case, all the evidence they have. Even the police should be able to talk. The gag order, I was losing it. So they're going to have the gag. Hopefully there's a hearing to get the gag order released. Tonight we have a very special show with Dr. Joni Johnston, a forensic psychologist from the West Coast. She's fantastic. She has her own podcast called Unmasking a Murderer. She also has some books about 101 questions you would ask a serial killer, and the old author of the Human Equation and the Complete Guide to Psychology for Idiots. I love that one. You know, we should all probably read that one. Anyway, we're going to talk about the psychosexual relationship to these murders in regards to Bryan Kohberger. It seems like no one else has spoken about that. In fact, the prosecutor is in denial that that even existed. And hopefully Dr. Joni will help set this straight. And that's why we have her on the show. She's wonderful. Anyway, folks, hold on to your hats. Hold on to your loved ones. Hold on to your cup of coffee. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your sports betting action. And with baseball in full swing and football season around the corner, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting. From Major League Baseball, UFC to tennis and NFL futures, BetOnline remains your choice for sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. Head to the website today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. BetOnline, the game starts here. I'm going to introduce our cast of characters right away because I don't want to have you waiting. With us tonight is retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike.
Bill, good evening. Good to see you. Thank you for having me on.
Good to see you, Mike. And from straight out of Brooklyn, we have retired NYPD detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you for having me, Billy. Hello, Mike.
Good to see you, Phil.
And of course, all the way from the West Coast, even though she's just probably sitting in her living room, we have the esteemed Dr. Joni Johnston. Welcome, Dr. Johnston.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Doc.
It's so great to have you here. I mean, it's just, I'd have you on every night if we could, but I don't have the topic that we would need to put you on every night. But you are wonderful, and I'm so glad you're here. Dr. Joni, with this psychosexual thing, and I think we all agreed on a previous show that had Bryan Kohberger not been apprehended, there's almost no doubt he would have become a serial killer. And some of these traits that we're finding in him, the psychosexual reason for this attack, the attack was done with a knife. A knife is a very personal way to kill someone, right? Seemingly, he targeted a specific female. Everyone agrees it was Madison Mogen, even though the district attorney claims there's no evidence of it, but everyone seems to know it. So are they just making this stuff up? Also, from the defense, they said he was on the autism spectrum. That's synonymous with serial killers also.
Mhm.
And in his childhood or growing up, he had a drug problem. Your comments, Dr. Joni?
I really struggle with this case, at least after he has confessed and pled guilty and all that, because it's such a task, I think, deciding how much of it is hindsight and how much of it is additional information, if that makes sense. And I think that's really significant in terms of trying to figure out what is the best way to kind of navigate all this. So I think that's something that I think would be really important to talk about in terms of when we look at what has occurred, how do we separate out the fact that now that we know the end, is everything else tainted, right, by what happened before? So do we look at things like if he's not, if he's not talking about things, if he's not doing things the way we would think he would be, does that mean something pathological? Or again, is it something that's much easier to talk about? So, I think that's the first question I have is, how do we even evaluate these things without what we know has happened after the fact kind of clouding it? And at the same time, there's the whole issue of the fact that once we know new information, that can provide some clarity. What we can kind of go, oh, this makes sense now. If I had known this was going on, I had no idea. Now that I know that he was stalking and he was doing these things. And so I think that before we even talk about what behaviors mean, it becomes a matter of how do we, make sense of this in terms of not letting our hindsight bias kind of come into play, but at the same time, getting new information and using that.
Well, Dr. Joni, I think that there's been a lot of politicization of this case also. And when the district attorney, Bill Thompson, did his presentation at the plea hearing with all the evidence that the state had, he said a few things that were not true, and that disturbed me. One of the things was he said there was no evidence at all of any stalking. That was absolute bullshit. They had him 23 times in the vicinity of 1120. Why was he doing that? Why was he doing that? Also, we don't know for sure that he targeted Madison Mogen, but it's pretty damn well that he's the first one she attacked. So he knew where he was going. He knew how to get into that house. That's not the sign of a criminal that's done his homework. Phil.
Yeah, Billy, I think you laid out something that really makes a lot of sense because of the fact he went right directly to that room. It appears that he entered the house and went upstairs to that room. So it could very well be that Madison Mogen was the target. And we know that perhaps Ethan Chapin and the others were collateral, so to speak. With regard to whether or not there was a psychosexual component to this whole thing, the little bit of research I did on psychosexual behavior, there is a couple of points that he kind of falls into with relation to the drug problem. We don't know what exactly went on in his younger years, but it does appear that he was overweight. He had a heroin addiction. Then he kicked the heroin addiction. He lost a lot of weight. And it appears like when he went to the school, he tried to engage with females. He asked the girl for a number at that pool party. And it seemed like he did have some awkwardness in social situations. So when you look up and when you study these type of behaviors, there's a few categories where he falls in. Involving intense sexual urges and fantasies and behaviors involving unusual objects and situation causing distress or impairment. I think that right there, that's a paraphilia, what I found on the internet. And I think that he could fall into some of those categories. So I don't think that the fact that he now pled guilty is based on whether or not it's going to be that he doesn't want to talk about it. I think the death penalty being on the table and a very strong, hard conversation with his lawyer after all of the motions were denied that, look, Bryan, there's a very good chance you're going to get convicted and you could be facing the death penalty. That's what I think motivated the deal for him to plead guilty.
Mike, I know you did some research on this. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the problem I have with this, with Bill Thompson saying that there was no, sexual component to it, is, to me, it's a farce, because you've got a difference in gender. He attacked a female. We know that he went by that house about 23 times between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. What are you doing there? He brought a knife. That shows a lot of anger. That's a real personal weapon. He didn't get a gun and shoot somebody from 100 yards away. And the trouble I have with it, with the whole setup of the crime is, in order to be a psychosexual criminal act, a homicide, does there have to be an actual rape or an attempted rape? And we don't see it, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't thinking about it, or the fact that maybe Kaylee Gonzalez being in the same bedroom may have thwarted his plans. But doctor, does it have to have an attempted rape component to it before
No.
it becomes a psychosexual crime?
No, it definitely does not.
Okay.
And there's so many things to unpack here in terms of, there have been so many different theories. Is this an incel, right? Is this somebody who took all this, all this information about incels and what does that mean, and all this, or is this a budding serial killer, and how does that work? And I think that what we're coming to realize is that both can be true.
Okay.
Right. Here's somebody who can be very angry, have all kinds of resentment about the fact that he didn't get the women he wants. And he's, gazing from afar and wanting all these women and feeling all this anger and all this resentment. And we also know plenty of people who killed one time and got pretty turned on by it.
Right.
And, I do not think that, even if there's the whole Papa Roger thing, if that's true, that's something to kind of think about as well. But here's the reality. Papa Roger was ready to go out in a blaze of glory. That is not what we're seeing, right? That is not what we're seeing when we talk about this case.
Right.
I think that Bryan Kohberger wanted to get away. And maybe he wanted to gloat. Maybe he wanted to put all these things online and, kind of tease all this stuff. But I don't think he had any intention or desire at all to get caught. And that's very different from this kind of mass shooter who decides to go out and get all this attention. So I think there's a lot of interesting aspects to this. But the psychosexual part of it, again, it kind of becomes, what does that mean? Well, let's say you see these girls and you're attracted to these girls and you're interested in a specific girl and you feel rejected by these girls. And you fantasize about being with these girls, and then you fantasize about being or getting revenge on these girls. I mean, how often do we see in psychosexual murders or in sexually motivated murders this blurring of anger and rage and desire for revenge with sexual attraction and desire to dominate them sexually? They're often blended together.
Dr. Joni, the other thing is we didn't get a real feeling from the autopsy reports of that was a possibility of overkill. And just recently, we found out that Ethan Chapin was stabbed a great deal in his legs, like gouged out in his legs. To me, that is overkill. And that is also the sign of a psychopath.
Well, it's certainly the sign of a tremendous amount of anger and resentment. And I do think he had that toward any, man that could be successful in, getting a woman. So there really are, I think, in my opinion, kind of blends of this incel philosophy, this incel kind of, I can't get the women that I want, and it's not my fault, it's their fault. And the fact that I'm awkward and condescending and all that has nothing to do with this. And I'm sick of being rejected and all this, with this very, very, very deviant, I think, sexual interest that he has here. And so I don't think he's somebody that we can necessarily put into like a little category, a little box. And it also kind of brings up this whole issue of, would he have killed again? And, if you're going down the incel path, it's like, oh no, he just wanted to kind of, if the incel path is like, no, he was going out in this big blaze of glory. If you're on the sexually motivated path, you're thinking, is this trial one that's going to be continued?
Good point.
And I think there's a lot of evidence that no matter what his background in terms of resentment toward, young women and all this kind of stuff, I think there's a good chance that he would have continued down the path of continuing to kill. And that's
100%.
different from the typical, kind of incel. This suggests somebody who I think, was very interested in continuing along the path of being, turned on and at the same time angry and merging those together.
Absolutely. I want to play this from Good Morning America because a book by James Patterson and a woman named Vicky Ward is coming out, I think, a couple of days before the sentencing. How appropriate, right? And they interviewed over 200, 300 people. So let me play this here.
On the Idaho college murders case, it details what those closest to the victim believe may have been the motive. Kana Whitworth joins us with the story. Good morning, Kana.
Yeah, Michael, good morning. So ahead of next week's sentencing, James Patterson and Vicky Ward discussed their new book about the murders. It's based on hundreds of interviews surrounding this case. And in this book, they reveal new details and attempt to lift the veil of secrecy that has shrouded this case for more than 2 years. This morning, new revelations from those closest to Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin about what they believe was the motive behind Bryan Kohberger's brutal murders of the 4 University of Idaho students.
For people who have followed this story, we wanted to give them closure.
Best-selling author James Patterson and investigative reporter Vicky Ward teaming up for the new book, The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy, conducting over 300 interviews with people with ties to the case, including family and friends who believe Maddie was the target.
There was consensus that it was Maddie that Kohberger was going for, and the victims' families, I think, would all agree with that. Everything points to that.
Moscow police allege the culprit's cell phone records show his phone appears to have been close to the King Road house on at least 12 occasions between August and the night of the murders in November, almost always late at night. The book also describing what it calls a recurring nightmare of a close friend, Emily Alott, after the murders, saying she imagined that the now convicted murderer went to the restaurant where Maddie worked, expressed a romantic interest in her, and was rejected. He then retaliated. You wrote about this recurring dream that Emily Alott was having, that in her dream, Bryan Kohberger met Maddie at the Mad Greek, where we know that she worked with Xana. Tell me a little bit about how she explained that dream to you and how you put it into writing.
When they are told that the guy who murdered their friends is this guy, Bryan Kohberger, they don't recognize his photo.
Right, a total stranger.
They can't put it together. That's when Emily said the only explanation that she and Hunter could come up with is the story that, we tell as the story of her dream, that Bryan Kohberger targeted Maddie, and that she doesn't know the exact details, but that's her best guess.
Lead prosecutor Bill Thompson says Maddie was the first person the culprit killed. The knife sheath with his DNA found under her body.
Kohberger, the criminologist, had such training for this, and he almost committed the perfect crime. Had he not left the knife sheath, he probably wouldn't have gotten caught.
For nearly 7 weeks, he hid in plain sight one of the only sources of real information, a surviving roommate who told friends what she saw.
It's really through Emily that we learned of what sort of Dylan had gone through. And it sounded so surreal to them all, because she said he had a black mask and he looked like he was carrying a black vacuum. And they're sitting there thinking, who could this be? And, what on earth has happened?
Just weeks ago, Kohberger taking a plea deal, admitting he killed the 4 friends. Patterson and Ward now hoping to give readers a true sense of who they were and all of their promise.
You will meet Ethan and Kaylee and Maddie and Xana. You will meet them and you will feel them as human beings.
I spoke to Stacey Chapin, Ethan's mom, and she did say, which was wonderful to hear, that she's so glad that this book exists, because it means that they're not forgotten. It is a tribute to them and their lives.
And it is so important to remember how they lived their lives. The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy, is out now. Also,
You know, I don't know how you guys feel. I feel a little bit disturbed by this because shouldn't it come from the horse's mouth? The statements. How about all of the poetic license they took here about the dream by Emily Allant? How about you talk to the people that worked on the case, the detectives, the FBI? How about talking to the prosecutor at some point? All this stuff is sort of conjecture, and how convenient that it's coming out the week before he gets sentenced. I find that disturbing, Phil.
Yeah, 2 points I want to make, Bill, before I address what you're talking about right now. There was definitely a recon by Bryan Kohberger. There, you want to call it stalking, it was recon. And he was going to the location late at night, and he targeted that location. There's no question about that. The other thing, what you talked about, the overkill with regard to Ethan Chapin, it could have been a jealousy rage, because if she was the intended target, now he finds her in the room with a male, boyfriend, whatever you want to call it, a companion. So he became enraged even more, and I think that might be what attributes to the overkill on him. Now, with regard to what you're talking about with the research that was done for the book, of course you'd want to speak to the investigators on the case or get inside information from the case folder itself. I mean, there's a lot of details in there that we were hoping that were going to come out at a trial, if there was going to be a trial, that we don't know now. So I'm sure going forward, once this case is fully over, Freedom of Information Act, that people might make requests for free information through the Freedom of Information Act clauses. And I think we may find out some of those details, but there's a lot that we know. And I think that the fact that they're saying that there was no signs of stalking, that's baloney. And this fact that they're talking about a dream, I don't like to, that's almost like
it's poetic license. That's what it is.
Besides poetic license, it's like using these people that they could see into the future, almost like gypsies, palm readers, or psychics. Listen, I want to know for a fact, if we know, did he go into that restaurant and get rejected by her? That's something that I would like to know. That was out there in the. Say again, Bill?
No, I want to know that too, and I don't like conjecture. And we had spoken off the air about some of the things that bother us about this case, Dr. Joni. And when I talk about the politicization of this, knocking that house down ripped me apart. Terrible. I couldn't believe, and that was the university, because the university was losing enrollment, because no one wanted to go to the school that had 4 murdered students. So the quicker they could get that house knocked down, the better they were. And the owner of the house donated the house to the university. But you know something? If this case went to trial, you would have wanted to have that house and have the jury walk through it. Professor Mike.
Bill, absolutely. As a prosecutor, you want that. You describe a house, people are thinking about it, it's in the abstract. But when you go to the house as a member of that jury, and you walk through the hallway, you go up the stairs, you look from the 3rd floor where he came in down to the 2nd floor, and see how narrow or wide that staircase is. Just it's a real visceral reaction to think about, where you are standing, 4 people fought for their lives and were stabbed to death in the most horrific fashion, 2 in that bedroom, 1 over there and 1 over there. And that is something that those jurors would never, ever forget. And all the talking in the world can't match that. That was a terrible, terrible mistake to tear that down.
100%. Dr. Tony, I just want to ask you something. Now, Bryan Kohberger, the man, I mean, he in his plea, he showed almost no emotion. He just said yes, yes, yes. I thought, to me, that was a little bit disturbing, but just sort of showed that he is a psychopath.
Well, I certainly don't think he has a lot of remorse about what happened. So we can trace some of his development from childhood and some of his events that happened to him that were painful and traumatic, and we can kind of fast forward to here. But I think that at the point where he committed these murders, he had long ago kind of if he had remorse for anything he did in the past, he had extinguished that, because this took so much planning, so much fantasizing, so much reconnaissance, as you were saying. He's certainly had time to discard any of those emotions. So I can't imagine at this point he has any remorse, or he's ever going to express any remorse, because he doesn't have it. So that part of it, and I would agree with you, I have to say, because it just, from a psychological standpoint, as well as from a police officer standpoint, nobody can argue that seeing a model of a house is equivalent to walking through this house and seeing where people were, where they were found, how the house was laid out, where, Maddie and Kaylee were upstairs. I mean, there's no substitute for that.
No. And
So,
Dr. Joni, just before I forget about this, him doing these recons, these say 23 recons, him reliving, is that part of the psychosexual excitement that he gets from planning this? And even as far as, we always put this picture up on the screen. That is a trophy. That is a serial killer trophy. That's him on the same morning of the murders celebrating, I did it. I got away with this. And I can look at this picture now forever and just remember that was the morning of the murders and get his jollies from that. And how about this? The Grim Reaper look, and of course the balaclava. All of these things, I think, are so significant to the planning, the execution, and I think that's how he gets his jollies off, Dr. Joni.
And the psychology, you're absolutely right. And I was responding to these kind of, incel versus serial killer theories, because that's what I keep saying online, is this argument, it's one or the other. And absolutely, he has some very, very interesting ways, as you talked about, this thumbs up. I mean, that's kind of a serial killer vibes there. The fact, this guy, I was watching a podcast earlier about, the fact that Bryan Kohberger is living his best life, and he wanted to get caught, and he planned to impress Catherine Ramsland. I don't buy any of that. I really don't. I think this was somebody who had translated his pain, like many people who had gone before him, into this anger and rage and sex, and they had become fused for him. And so he was absolutely determined to get revenge, to get, to act out his rage, and also to convince himself he was smarter than everybody else in the room and do all this reconnaissance. And I think he didn't think he was ever going to get caught. And I absolutely believe that after a period of time, when if he had gotten away with it, those fantasies and that urge and that desire to do that would have happened again.
100%. And and Dr. Joni, I've read that, and I've heard people say that, oh, is it possible he left the knife sheath on purpose? That bullshit. No, he did not. That he did that. Whoever thinks that has no concept of crime. You know what I mean? He wanted to get away with this so he could do it again.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's nothing that we know about Bryan Kohberger that says he was somebody who was overtly bragging, who was interested in being this public figure. He wanted to be sneaky, and he wanted to get away with stuff and do stuff again so he could sit back and maybe tease, the online communities, or, whatever, however he got his jollies off. But no, he had no desire whatsoever to get caught.
100%. Phil, I'm sorry I stepped on you. Go ahead.
That's okay. He went to great lengths.
Yeah.
I mean, the first biggest thing that you could look at is shutting off his cell phone on the way there. I mean, that's consciousness of guilt, as Mike always says, and all the other things. There was no blood in his vehicle. We think he donned some type of an outer garment that he discarded to keep blood off of his clothing or whatever he was wearing underneath. There's just so many things. And we know he studied serial killers. He was a criminology going for his, listen, everybody knows all the details, but the bottom line is that I think everybody's in agreement. He was going to do this again. He went to great lengths not to get caught. That thumbs up in that morning, that picture says so much about him, so much. He, like you said, Bill, that was his trophy. He was celebrating. He took a shower because the shower was behind him. His hair was still wet. There it is. And he celebrated, I did it. And I believe in his mind, he thought it was 100% foolproof that he wasn't going to get caught. However, the knife sheet, and we know the rest of the story, was very, very imperative to him being captured and identified. And now he's in jail. And thank God that that happened, because I am firmly in the belief that he was going to kill again.
You know, just today, the Chapin, the mom and dad went on the Today Show. I want to play a little bit of that.
2 years after the murder of their son Ethan, Stacy and Jim Chapin tell us in an exclusive interview they finally have closure.
When you heard that this plea deal was going to go through, what was your reaction?
If I could physically do a handstand at that time, I'd probably do one, because I am so ready for it to be done.
Ethan Chapin, along with his girlfriend Xana Kernodle and her housemates Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan, all University of Idaho students, were brutally stabbed to death in November 2022 by Bryan Kohberger. Earlier this month, the former criminology student pled guilty to the murders in a plea deal that took the death penalty off the table. He's now expected to spend life in prison without parole.
I think our initial response was like an eye for an eye. But then we've spent a ton of time talking about it with prosecutors. And for us, we always felt like this was a better deal. I mean, he gets put away and there's no appeal system to it. And there were so many kids, including our own, that had been subpoenaed that no longer have this hanging over their heads. I mean, we just all get to go live our life.
There are some family members who feel like this plea deal now means that Bryan Kohberger won't face the highest form of punishment.
Everybody's entitled to grieve and feel how they want. Yeah, it's just not how we feel.
He's going to get what's coming to him. I really don't care what happens to the guy. He's off the streets and he can't hurt any more kids.
And that's the most important
That's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
At the plea hearing, the Chapins saw their son's killer in person for the first time.
Yes. It was cold and calculated and weirdly like an automated phone message.
Yes.
I mean, it was just like you expected some, I don't know,
There's just nothing.
Remorse, emotion, something, and there was zero.
Did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
Did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
When they have to read through the charges, it was like, oh, here we go. I had to take a little. That one was tough.
It's tough to listen to that.
Ethan's family says their focus now is honoring the amazing person that he was, his parents, and for the first time, his triplet siblings, Maisie and Hunter, sharing their story in a new Prime Video documentary about the murders.
I was so scared to go to bed. It was just silence. Because such a big member of our family just wasn't there anymore.
What do you hope people take away from the documentary?
What great kids they were.
Yeah.
We made a decision as a family that we would tell our version of Ethan's story one time. He was an amazing kid, and it's reflected in that.
The Chapins also started a foundation, Ethan Smile, to spread his joy, so far providing more than $100,000 in scholarships to nearly 90 students. The family finding ways to feel Ethan's presence.
We put Ethan's ashes into it.
And make sure he's never forgotten.
We all went and got tattoos. This was him, a note he wrote, like, I don't know, he probably was in the 4th grade.
Every morning, they talk to him.
You tell him what's going on in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's missed.
I miss you, dude.
Yeah.
But that's how I start my day every day.
Big and small ways to honor Ethan's memory.
I have him where I need him, in my mind, in my heart, in my soul.
My goodness, those parents.
You know, I hate the word closure. I hate it.
There is no such thing in this.
There is no such thing. These people lost their son, and 3 families lost their daughters. There is no such thing as closure. Yes, after he gets sentenced, and I also want to put on record, I hate Bryan Kohberger. When I saw that robot, I wanted to strangle him myself. Yes. So arrogantly, like he killed, a rabbit, or he killed a dog or something. He killed 4 human beings, and like people watch this and they get, oh, look, we're reporting on it, but there's certain things about this case that really irk me. And here's this really would-be serial killer just responding to, now he's more just concerned about himself and the miserable life he's going to have for the rest of his life, sitting in solitary confinement in a state prison. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, you remember when he was being taught by Dr. Ramsland at DeSales, one of the people that she specialized in was the BTK killer, Dennis Rader. And he did probably 8 or 9 homicides, I think, from the 70s into the 80s in at least that many in Kansas. And he would do them, and then he would be fine for a while. He'd be back to normal. And then he would describe an urge and an interest, and he would take on a project. And the next project would be scoping somebody out, deciding how he's going to kill them, when he's going to kill them, how he's going to kill them. And he spent a lot of time researching and making sure he didn't get caught. And I think that kind of idea was probably, as Dr. Joni said, right in the back of his mind. If he got through with this one, he'd be calm for a while, and somewhere along the line, the urge would build up again, because he'd have to prove once again to other people somewhere along the line, when he was maybe dissed or disrespected in some way, that he would do it all over again. So I think he was a serial killer in the making. And as far as the Chapins are concerned, yeah, there's no closure, but I think they have a great attitude as survivors to say, look, you know, we have to live. We have our other children. We have our family. We have to live. And Ethan's in our heart and our soul. And therefore, we can move on, and we could speak to him in our minds every single day. I think that is a powerful message. And all my heart goes out to that family.
You know, Mike, I love Jim and Stacy Chapin, and
Yeah.
I really admire them. That's not me, though. I could not turn the other cheek. I would want to go kill that guy, you know. But you know something? Their reaction is much healthier. I'll probably die of a heart attack from it, because I would take that anger with me to bed every night. Dr. Joni, could you help me?
Well, I can start by saying you're not alone. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, even within the families, there's a little bit of a disconnect, not a disagreement in terms of how this could have best handled. And I think nobody's right? Nobody's wrong here. But I think one thing I will say that I think is really important, and this is a personal opinion of mine, but I've seen too many people talking about how, you know, that he's won. Bryan Kohberger has won. And I've heard this everywhere recently. He's gotten what he wanted. He's gotten all this fame. He's gotten this recognition. And I do not believe that. He has not won. And I don't think Bryan Kohberger thinks he's won. He thought he was going to be this devious kind of mastermind who was going to continue for as long as he wanted to, get away with this, secretly gloat, maybe plant little threads in some online forums about how he knew more than everybody else, maybe do it again. But no, this is not the life that he thought he was going to have after this. And so I think it's really important, because it gives him so much more power to be talking about the fact that he's won, and he's, you know, this, maybe he, like you were saying, Bill, that he, you know, left this knife sheet on purpose, or he somehow has, you know, gotten. No, he is going to have a miserable life. Now, you know, we can argue how miserable it should be and whether he should even have a life, but I think it's really a disservice to the victims, in a way, to give him this much power that he's somehow still controlling the show, because he's not. He just isn't.
You know,
and he's
Dr.
not
Joni,
going to.
Myself, Phil, and Professor Mike, we've interviewed murderers. We've been in the same room with them for hours and hours. And most of them are very unimpressive people. As you know, you've interviewed thousands of them yourself.
Yeah.
And they're not even that interesting, you know. And a commonality with every single murderer I've ever met, they're afraid to die. They don't have any problem killing someone, but they're afraid to die themselves. And that's why, whatever you think about the death penalty, and I think that, you know, I said this on a couple of shows, the death penalty has been hijacked by a political movement, and it doesn't serve its purpose anymore, except it served its purpose in this case because it forced the defense to come to the table and take a deal, because they were afraid that their client was going to get the death penalty. Phil, I could see you shaking your head. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I was torn when I heard that he was going to plead guilty, because, and I said this in a previous show, would I love to put my hands around his throat and choke the life out of him for what he did to those 4 beautiful, innocent young kids? Yes, I would. But then the other side of it is the families are not going to have to go through what's going to happen at a trial, where there are going to be crime scene photos and there's going to be explicit talk about the things that happened to these 4 beautiful young kids. And I think that Bryan Kohberger, like Dr. Joni said, is not going to have this glamorous life. He's going to be in jail. He's probably going to be segregated. And maybe at some point, there's going to be bloodthirsty prisoners that may want to get at him and exact some revenge. So he's not going to live this charming life. He's going to be in jail for the rest of his life without any chance of a parole or any chance of an appeal or anything like that. So he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail, and it's not going to be a happy place. It's going to be a miserable place. And I think that Dr. Joni's right. We shouldn't celebrate him. He is not in control. He took the plea because of what you just said, Bill. He was afraid to die. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very simple, and I think we're all in agreement. He was going to do it again. So he is where he belongs. So half of me, did I want the death penalty? If there was ever a case in our nation that called for the death penalty, this was the case. But I'm okay with the fact that it's turning out the way it's going to turn out.
100%. Jane C., thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. Very much appreciated. And folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. If you want to subscribe to us, hit our subscribe button, like, share, and comment. That helps the algorithm here. And if you want to help us financially, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels and a YouTube channel membership with Count on 5 different levels. But please hit that subscribe button. I see a lot of new people here who aren't subscribed, so hit that subscribe button. Yeah, I mean, this case is, it's coming to an end, but it's not. There's been a lot of mistakes. I think one of the things was a big mistake was really holding on to this gag order much too long, because right now he pled guilty. There's no reason to still have the gag order. And I think we would all like to know, and I would hope on the 23rd, and I don't know if anyone will ask this question, what'd you do with the knife? They certainly are allowed to ask that. Why not ask it, right? Describe to us how you planned for this and how you cleaned up the crime scene, how you got rid of the clothes, because there's so many people out there, we call them the pro-burgers, that actually think that the state forced him to confess. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, he did this. No, he decided to confess knowingly, willfully, intentionally. He consented to this with the help of Ann Taylor, because she probably laid it out for him. Look, if you get convicted, you're going to be convicted, 99.99% sure, and there's a really good chance you could be put on death row. And you're going to be on death row probably for 25 or 30 years. Now, there's going to be all kinds of appeals, and that's great. It'll keep your name in the paper. Maybe you'll be famous, but you're going to be sitting on death row. However, if you're going to do life, there may be some more access to outside people. Maybe some reporter will want to ask you a question or something like that, but you're going to have something maybe slightly a better condition, in prison. But he made his decision, and he's got to live with it. And I think it was the best decision for everybody concerned. I'm sorry the way Bill Thompson handled the plea agreement, and I'm sorry that he didn't ask questions or beforehand talk to Judge Hippler and have Judge Hippler ask those questions. But maybe we'll hear something from at the sentencing, but I doubt it. I think for anything, he loves power, and I think and loves dominance, likes to be in control. And I don't think, if given the opportunity to speak, that Kohberger will say anything at all. I think that's something that he has, that it might be not much, but I think he wants to keep it, because that's the one thing he can hang on to right now, because he's lost all power. He's lost all control. He won't be able to shower when he wants, eat when he wants, exercise when he wants, watch TV when he wants, read whatever he wants. That's all gone.
Absolutely. Lori C., thank you for the $10 super sticker. I question myself on why I watched this true crime, Bryan Kohberger. My daughter went to a college close by. As a parent, this hurts so much. He will be famous in that cell. No, well, after a while, no one will care that he's in that cell. They'll forget he's in that cell because he's going to be in solitary confinement. Imagine going through 50 years of not talking to anyone except yourself. Be like Robinson Crusoe, dribbling on yourself after a while, no books, no anything. I want to just play a little bit of Bill Thompson here.
Tell the court, in public, the weapon itself, the knife, has not yet been recovered. I can tell the court that the defendant's apartment in Pullman was searched, as well as his office. Spartan would be a kind characterization. There was virtually nothing there. Nothing of evidentiary value was found. And of course, we are now talking 6-8 weeks after the time of the killings. In Pennsylvania, the defendant's car was seized, and it was actually pretty much disassembled internally. And it also had been cleaned. There was a bucket of cleaner right beside it. I think we can all look to our own cars, in those compartments in the doors. You can try to keep them clean where you put stuff. There's always some degree of crud in there. They were spotless. The defendant's car had been meticulously cleaned inside. And the state would present to the jury that that was part of the defendant's plan in covering up this. The defendant has studied crime. In fact, he did a detailed paper on crime scene processing when he was working on his pre-doctorate degrees, and he had that knowledge and skill. So, Your Honor, at the end, the state submits that the evidence that I've given just a quick overview of, and that to present in court would consume weeks, which the state is prepared to do and has been prepared to do, would show that as the defendant has just admitted and pleaded guilty on November 13th, 2022, excuse me.
This is what Matt Murphy criticized, that Bill Thompson got all choked up as he mentioned the names of the murdered kids.
Mr. Kohberger entered the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. He did that with the intent to kill. We will not represent that he intended to commit all of the murders that he did that night, but we know that that is what resulted, and that he then killed intentionally, willfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice forethought. Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, and Santa Cruz. Thank you.
So I don't know if everyone that's listening knows who the prosecutor, Matt Murphy, is, the Orange County prosecutor, California, undefeated in murders. He watched that and he was horrified at that. And look, from the human standpoint, I could understand him getting choked up. But from a professional standpoint, which Matt Murphy is, the ultimate prosecutor, he was like, that was bullshit. He was really pissed off at this. And I don't know, Dr. Joni, what are your thoughts about that?
I'm having a hard time understanding why anybody would be angry about this. I mean, to show human emotion in a situation when you're talking about the death of 4 college students. So, I mean, I want to ask the three of you, what would be problematic about that kind of presentation? And to me, from a community standpoint, at least, that would be a huge credibility builder. That here are these cops that are tough and macho, and they're great, they're smart, and they're out there, and they have feelings. They care about their victims. They care about what happens. They care about, it affects them personally. We know it does.
I got choked up when watching Ethan Chapin's parents. I actually got choked up just now. So I did have emotion about it. I have children that are in the age of these 4 beautiful young kids that died. So I could definitely see becoming emotional about it. But I think the point that I think Bill was trying to get at, and I kind of get that, this was the time to be a little bit more professional and maybe try to hold that back. Maybe he couldn't. I don't know what was going through his mind at that moment, but I literally got choked up listening to those poor parents that they lost their child. So I do understand the emotion for sure.
Dr. Joni, I would get choked up too. I didn't have a problem with that. I was just saying what Matt Murphy said, who was so pissed off that they didn't follow through and go for the death penalty, that when the defense came to them, that they gave them the out of taking a plea. And Matt Murphy was like, this is the case. You went right to the wall and went for the death penalty. And I'm disgusted that they didn't. And he goes, look at what he even got choked up. He was pissed. And I was like, I was a little surprised at that, because I could understand a prosecutor getting choked up, especially he's been working this for 2.5 years. he's met the families. He knows all of the inside story of this. So I don't have a problem with that. But I'm being a reporter, I guess. Mike.
Well, no, actually, I think I appreciate you sharing that, Bill, because I understand now more the context in terms of this is somebody who's just done a plea deal with Bryan Kohberger. So to me, it seems like it's not so much the fact that he's choked up about this, that he's got emotion. I'm sure if he'd come out and said, we're going for the death penalty and I can't even stand to talk about this, and he'd gotten choked up then, right? He would have had a different reaction. So it seems to me like it's more like perhaps he feels like this is hypocritical. This is somebody who's choked up and coming out and showing this emotion. Well, really, if you felt this way, why are you, caving? Right. Why are you accepting this?
That's exactly right, Dr. Joni.
That is right.
So that's a different context.
I didn't explain it well, and you got it anyway.
Doctor. I have a quick question for Dr. Joni, and I got to put this out there before you go. Now, when I did my little bit of research on psychosexual behavior, sexual sadism came up, and it says attainment of sexual arousal by inflicting pain upon the sexual object. I think that falls into this 100%. Would you agree with that, Doc? Do you think there was a sexual sadism component to this whole thing?
I think this is such a tricky one for this reason. Typically, when we think about sadism or sexual sadism, we think about torture, we think about bondage, we think about very, very almost extreme kind of behaviors. Cruel. There's no question about that. This is cruel, it's premeditated, it's cold-blooded. There's all those kind of things. So I think it depends on how are we defining sadism. If we're defining it from a psychological standpoint, I think it may not fit neatly in that. It might jump in here at any point in time. And I think this is where I think that Kohberger is, in some respects, I really do believe this, I think almost a hybrid in terms of, on the one hand, there's all these rumors, I guess. And I think they're probably good pretty well feathered rumors about this Papa Rogers account. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, right? The Papa Rogers and there's no doubt there's been documentation that he studied Elliot Rodger, who was this kind of incel. He's been called the king of incels, right? And this is somebody who's, this group of young men oftentimes who feel left out and angry and bitter that they can't get women, and there's a whole subculture around that. So there's that part of it, and then there's the serial killer part of it, the psychosexual part of it. And I think we can make. I think that he is a hybrid to some extent. I think he's angry. I do think he feels resentful that women don't like him for whatever reason, not taking any responsibility for how he interacts with them. And then there is this kind of sexual, overtones to that, this potential serial killer. But I think the psychosexual component is more indirect than we oftentimes see. And I think that, to me, the issue with him is would he do it again? Yes. And I think, did he plan to do it again? Perhaps. But I do think for him, it's more than one motive. It is revenge, it's punishment, and it's also the sexual domination kind of part of it. And what I can see is him being somebody who, initially is thinking more along the lines in terms of his murder, at least, to get this revenge. But I can certainly see that it might have been extremely sexually stimulating for him. And this is where I can see him continuing along the same path.
Doc, that's very interesting. And the thing was, we have to have a forensic psychologist come on our show to validate this theory, which very few people have ever spoken about during the 2.5 years, the course of this investigation. And I think it's pretty damn obvious, and we always, as homicide investigators, there's a personal nature to using a knife to kill somebody. Yes. It's really one of the most horrific ways to kill someone, because you feel them breathing on you. You feel the blood pouring on you. I don't want to get too graphic, but it's a very personal way. And then connect that to this psychosexual attraction he had to his victims. It's a scary thing, I think. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, he's any remorse that we talk about, he can't have any remorse. He doesn't feel remorse. He feels remorse for what happens to him personally. He is very capable of feeling deep emotion, but it's deep emotion directed towards himself. I was dissed by a girl. I was disrespected. I'm angry. It's never like I'm apologetic. I feel bad because I did something wrong, or I lied and I got caught, or whatever happened. I hurt somebody's feelings. This He's a narcissist. I guess I'm sorry, I'm using words that maybe I shouldn't, but he's got some sort of very selfish narcissistic personality traits, and he's incapable of feeling anything genuine towards people because it's all transactional. It's a transactional relationship that he has with people to feed him and feed his ego and feed his feelings of whatever insecurity he has, or to assuage any problems he has and make him feel better. But he is very, very capable of feeling certain things, but it's all self-directed. And the sad part is that, as one of the people observed in a chat a couple of days ago, he's a smart guy and he excelled in the classroom, but when he gets out of the classroom and has to deal with humanity, he couldn't deal with it. He just could not deal with people. And that's sad. And what he did is so unforgivable. But that's part of his inability to moderate any sort of and have any sort of give and take with humans. It's really sad.
Yeah.
I have a feeling, and the folks in the chat, I'd like you to participate in this. If you think he'll say something at the sentencing hearing, if you think he'll speak, put a 1 in the chat. If you think he'll remain totally silent, put a 2 in the chat. My vote is I don't think he'll say a word.
I agree, Bill.
He's a coward. He's an absolute coward. Dr. Joni, what do you think?
I agree with you. I can't imagine him giving any kind of explanation, any kind of apology, anything like that, because I think at this point he's just going to he wants to feel as much control as he possibly can.
Yeah,
and he's always been that way. He's always attempted to control his environment. So yeah, I would be very, very surprised if he got up there and, started talking about how sorry he was, or, talking about all the methods he used or anything like that. He may talk about his methods and all this, how smart he was or whatever down the road, but he's not going to do it publicly. And certainly in the context of him being, sentenced.
It seems
I don't think he's sorry for what he did. I really don't.
No, I don't
think he's sorry at all. That's why those answers were yes, yes. He's showing no remorse. Of course, in his mind, he did what he wanted to do. The thumbs up, the picture the next morning.
Yeah.
It's clear.
It seems
That
like
really is clear.
most people agree that he's not going to talk. He is the coward that he is. He's a coward serial killer with no remorse. He's almost like a robot. He just says single word answers. Yes. Did you kill them? Yes. Yes. That to me was disturbing in itself. Mike, did you vote that he won't talk to?
Yeah, I don't think he won't talk at all. I think that's like Dr. Joni said, it's the one thing he can control. He'll hold on to that little crumb, and maybe 5 years down the line, he'll talk to a reporter or somebody that maybe he wants to impress, and he'll say something. But at this point, I think Dr. Joni's absolutely right.
Angie Mortz from the chat, he already got the plea. No need to apologize if it wasn't part of the plea agreement. You're right, Angie. That's probably how he feels. But something, his defense attorney came to him and said, look, you're going to get convicted. You're going to get the death penalty because we're not going to win. And to us and to most people that have sense, that single source touch DNA on the button of the knife sheath was Babe Ruth hitting a home run, hitting a grand slam. It really was. There's people out there still so stupid.
It was planted. It was
planted. The police planted it. They didn't even know who the perp was. How did they plant his DNA at the scene? Anyway, that was the piece of evidence. That was the piece de resistance, and that was, I don't think the defense could have overcome that. Mike, you're an attorney. What do you think?
Yeah, Billy, that people can disagree with the strength of testimony from an eyeball witness that saw circumstantially gave some sort of evidence that they saw him in the area, whatever it happens to be. But when you get DNA, and it's like 1 in 1 quadrillionth of a possibility that it's somebody other than him, people can hang their hat on and say, I vote, guilty based on this alone. That evidence, and people love DNA evidence because it's scientific, it's exact, it's been reliable for 30 years, 3 decades at least, And so therefore, any qualms they have about any of the personalities of the officers or the professionalism of the officers or whatever, they can rely on DNA and they can say, that's it, guilty.
And I
Good
think
point,
that's
Mike.
why this case was so interesting, is that they had that slam dunk evidence and all the other circumstantial evidence that you heard Bill Thompson saying. His house was cleaned like so pristine that, because he was trying to get rid of evidence. Same thing with his car, throwing garbage from his parents' garbage pails into his neighbor's garbage pails. All of those things. And he had 6 weeks to clean his car, So that's a hell of a long time to clean your car and to get rid of evidence. But even doing that with all that time, it's still tough to get rid of all the evidence because so much evidence is microscopic. Phil.
Yeah, Billy, they talked about that there was a bucket of cleaning fluid right next to the car, and he said they dismantled the car. I think they probably took the seats out. They went underneath the rugs. They were looking for some type of forensic, a blood drop, a hair. They were looking for something. And I think he made a good point. He said, in all the crevices in your car, no matter how much you vacuum and clean it, there's always that little spot that it's hard to get into that wasn't there. He went over that car numerous times. You talked about that when they were surveilling him, he was putting the garbage from his house into the neighbor's garbage, wearing gloves. When he was cleaning the car, he was wearing gloves. So a lot of things that he went to many levels, many steps, not to be captured, not to leave any evidence. And with all his studying, this was he studied crime scenes. It was just part of what he was going to do. He knew he took his steps and he followed through with it. And he was almost successful.
Absolutely. JD from the chat, thank you for the $10 super sticker. I agree that it's multifaceted, but I think that a large part of his motivation is he's on a search. He's trying to figure out what he has to do to actually feel something. Wow. That's pretty deep. Dr. Joni, would you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very insightful comment. I mean, I would say that he wants to feel good about something. I don't know that I think that this is somebody who feels nothing. I think he feels this low level grade of like emptiness on a regular basis. And maybe that's what we're talking about. But I think this is somebody who's looking to feel powerful, to feel good about himself or whatever, which he doesn't. And unfortunately, he picked up, just a bizarre and horrific way to try to do that.
Yeah, I think that, maybe he also went into criminology because somehow that turned him on, and he used it for bad purposes, used his knowledge in criminology for the worst possible purposes. Dr. Joni, you're always fantastic, and so I love to have you on the show.
I love coming. You guys are so much fun to talk to.
Doctor.
So much wisdom, and so much wisdom among the three of you.
Well, clearly the audience loves you too, because I make sure now I always put you on the thumbnail because they could see your Ashley Judd lookalike. Right there, you are. And then who's that handsome guy above you? Yeah, that's an old headshot. I keep that.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
I keep it as I age.
It looks good, though. Yeah. That was the perfect murder days, I think, right?
That's right. I think so. Yeah. So, Dr. Joni, I know I promised you about an hour, so we're about an hour and 3 minutes, so we're a little bit over. But I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm going to go around. I'm going to give everyone one last word. I'll start with you, Mike. Mike, your final thoughts.
I just want to say thank you very much to Dr. Joni Johnson to help us understand, because sometimes when we're doing research, especially when it's not in our wheelhouse, we get a little confused by all of the categories and all of the, and everything. So I just want to say thank you very, very much for enlightening us.
What a nice thing to say. And as I just said, I learned so much from the three of you when I'm on. So I love hearing the different perspectives. I feel educated when I hang up or when we log off. And, I had really mixed feelings about going on any podcast about Bryan Kohberger because we don't want to give him too much airtime. Right. So I think I had a lot of mixed feelings about it. But I think to the extent that we can honor the victims and we can also try to learn, at least in terms of whether it's warning signs, whether it's how to capture somebody, whatever it is, anything we can learn that's going to make the world a better place in terms of law enforcement, psychologist understanding and those kinds of things, it's always worthwhile to do.
Well, thank you, Dr. Joni. You went out of order a little bit, but that's okay because you're the guest. Phil, your final thoughts.
My final thoughts. I'm going to piggyback what Mike said because I think he hit the nail right on the head. We're in our wheelhouse talking about criminology. We interviewed murderers, all the different things, but now we have a better understanding of the psychological view of perhaps the way Kohberger was thinking. And I think you gave us a great background. And I asked you that question about the sadism. I think you kind of cleared that up a little bit too. And it's great to get that kind of an insight. And I think you're right. We don't want to give Kohberger too much credit, or we don't want to give him too much of the spotlight. But I always close these shows by saying the names of the victims: Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Xana Canodal. May they rest in peace, and may their families find some comfort in this horrible, horrible situation. And I guess it puts an end to it. Bill, you said it before. There is no closure for these families of these beautiful young kids. They're just going to have to be able to go on with life. And I think they're going to get justice. That's the only outcome that I see in this case, is justice for the families, no closure. But thank you, Dr. Joni, again for coming on, and God bless those victims and their families.
Absolutely. And again, I want to thank Dr. Joni one last time. And I know she's on the West Coast, so it's not that late for her. But I want to thank her. Whenever I ask her, she jumps on the show, and I love having her on the show. So, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. On behalf of myself, Bill Cannon, Phil Grimaldi, Professor Mike Geary, and Dr. Joni Johnson. Have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.